Hey there, men. Look at how defeminized and ugly I am now. I'm barely a woman. Ignore the huge knockers. Sorry, I get very passionate about that topic. It was the subject of my dissertation, after all. Back to those double standards I was talking about, which actually still ties into what I was talking about in my dissertation, because I extensively researched the way women's suffering has been depicted in media, such as Chanel Miller, who was the assault victim of Brock Turner, who famously only received 6 months in prison despite being caught in the act. Her memoir, Know My Name, is an active choice to reclaim her voice and the depiction of her suffering in the public consciousness and return the ownership of it to her. I also took the time to review research I undertook in my first year on Sophia Tolstoy, who I also believe falls under the purview of my thesis, as she was treated badly all her life by the men who primarily wrote her story and painted her in a miserable light. The topic of the inherently male violence and the dehumanization of women is something that I found many resources on, all the way back to Greek tragedies, where tragic female stories always began with establishing their beauty first. My Octopus Teacher and Environmental Horror and Analysis, a video essay on the documentary My Octopus Teacher, discusses the way the narrative frames the female octopus against the backdrop of a man's midlife crisis, with the narrative offering no self-awareness of this, ascribing female traits to a creature that has never encountered the gender binary, and never will. This highlights the extent men will go to have female tragedies serve their own narratives in media. If a man will even do this with an octopus, how far has this destruction of the female identity gone where the projection of said identity can be used in that way? As an aside, if you're a publisher and you like my work, hit me up. The point is, men can literally abuse women and still be allowed back into the industry, but a woman who has been papped acting erratically will be mocked for it for the rest of her life. Women will point out abuse, and people will cry out at the shame of a man's reputation being knocked because he had a whole career ahead of him and it's been taken away. If he didn't want to lose his career, maybe he shouldn't have done a crime? I don't know. Women are taught forgiveness and self-regulation from childhood, while men are taught to lead, whatever that means, and are given allowances for outbursts in a way women never would be. We're expected to put up with abuse from partners. We're less likely to be the abusers, but more harshly convicted when caught for domestic abuse. Something about that just doesn't add up, right? Women who've murdered their abusers or traffickers are given harsh prison sentences. Look at Cyntoia Brown, who was granted clemency in 2019 for the life sentence she received after killing her abuser at 16 years old. Robin Westgate got a life sentence for killing her husband and now works as a domestic violence consultant. Nicole Adimando, who was given 19 to life after shooting her abusive boyfriend, was refused a reduced sentence once before finally being granted one. Crystal Kaiser killed the man who had been sexually abusing her and filming it after meeting her when she was 16. She shot him when she was 17 after suffering abuse at his hands for over a year. She's been jailed for 11 years. He'd already been on the police's radar for abusing a dozen girls, all underage, and a few months before his death, police had arrested him but released him the same day. They had evidence, including videos, but he didn't get brought in. And now Crystal will serve 11 years in prison after spending 6 years fighting for her rights. She's 24 now. She'll be 35 when she leaves. Meanwhile, the piece of shit who raped Chanel Miller got 6 months of jail time, despite being convicted of all 3 charges of felony sexual assault. She was all but called a slut on the stand in order to frame his actions as consensual, and she bore it all with a level of self-control I wouldn't have managed, only to receive that result because they didn't want to ruin a man's life. His father famously stated, "The sentence is a steep price to pay for 20 minutes of action out of his 20 plus years of life." I find that if in 20 minutes you manage to rape, brutally beat, or kill someone, you should probably suffer consequences for that. But hey, that's just me. An ex-New York cop was recently sentenced to 10 weekends in jail for raping a 13-year-old. That's, so bad it borders on parody. The Onion can't beat that. And hey, speaking of weekend jail, the same judge who had passed down Brock Turner's sentence had, the same day, given a man 72 days in jail to be served on 12 concurrent weekends for domestic violence battery. Drew Clinton, an 18-year-old who raped an unconscious 16-year-old at a party, had his verdict changed from guilty to not guilty. And during his decision, the judge did not mention the victim, only seemed disgusted at the idea of inappropriate parties. He didn't say it was her fault for going, but he didn't charge an adult with the rape of a child. So I think we can infer that he was thinking it. Jacob Walter Anderson was charged with raping, gagging, and choking a woman at a frat party in 2016, but received only a $400 fine and agreed to go to counseling. Owen Labrie was handed down a year after assaulting a teenage girl a few years below him at the prep school he attended. I realized something that I didn't write in when I was listing examples of really horrible, horrible men. I was watching a documentary months ago on Netflix about a rape and murder that happened in New Zealand, and how essentially they had evidence on evidence on evidence on evidence that he did it. They have evidence that he met up with her, they had evidence that he took her back to his hotel, they had evidence that she never left the hotel, and they had evidence that he left the hotel with a suitcase and then drove to the middle of nowhere and then came back without the suitcase. We also have evidence that he went out that morning to buy said suitcase. It is an open and shut, this man raped and murdered this woman case, right? Some of the most evidence anybody has ever had for one of these cases.
He'd been trying to find a really large sports bag because he plays softball and he teaches children a lot of softball. But it was really hard for him to find a bag that could fit all of his equipment in. Like, he couldn't find one that was big enough. But in the end, he did manage to find one. So that was a win for him, he said, for the day. He was back in his apartment and I didn't know, and I couldn't do anything about it.
And yet they showed the court footage where they also had witnesses on behalf of the prosecution come in who were ex-girlfriends or ex-hookups of this guy, who also spoke about how he'd been violently dominating with them. He tried to do S&M stuff with them, which they weren't comfortable with. And obviously his defense was that, like, they'd done some S&M stuff which she'd asked for him to do, it had gone too far and he'd accidentally strangled her to death. That was his defense.
Ms. Millane raised and initiated and led these activities, the restraint, the slapping, the biting, and the choking. Of course, he was not experienced enough to actually know how to do this properly and what the dangers actually were.
It's a bullshit defense, and we all know it, because he then buried her body in the woods. But, like, sure, go off, King.
On the way back from burying Grace, he's barefooted. He couldn't be seen with muddy shoes. Then he gets his clothes dry cleaned.
He went and bought a second suitcase. That's the level of planning, because that sets up a scenario for him when he later speaks to the police.
I've still got that suitcase in my room, and you guys can have it if that's what you're assuming.
And then they had witnesses come forward and be like, oh, he did the same thing to me, I'm scared of him. He did the same thing to me, I stopped seeing him immediately. And then the footage goes on and you see lawyers for the defense cross-examine these witnesses and just call them sluts. Just call them sluts to their face. Like, all but say the word slut to their face. Tell them that, well, they obviously wanted it.
Do you think that you may have overemphasized or exaggerated what took place that night and how you really felt about it?
Not at all. That's not a pleasurable thing. He would have seen me kicking and writhing. You can't say that I was sitting there enjoying it. After he moved off me, after the struggling, after the holding me down, I said that I couldn't breathe.
That's just nonsense, isn't it? Nothing bad did happen. You weren't kicking or struggling at all. He didn't have hold of your arms. He didn't say any of those things to you.
This is not a lie. I'm not trying to justify anything. I don't want to be telling my horrific story in front of all you people, but I am, and it's the truth. And you can't take that away.
Frame this dead girl who cannot defend herself, again, I wrote a whole dissertation on this, as some kind of harpy who wanted violent sex and had to suffer the consequences, as opposed to a man who wanted to subjugate a woman so badly that he killed her. You know that there's evidence that after he killed her, he stayed in the room with her dead body, lying next to it on Pornhub. Do you think he was just watching for the fun of it? No, he was jerking off next to her dead body, because that's how little he cared about her life. But no, those women who had really harrowing experiences with him, and the woman who he killed, they're the problem. They're the sluts. They're the issue. And I get it. As a defense attorney, it is your job to try every possible angle in order that your client does not receive the harshest punishment. But that is reprehensible.
I don't care if that's your job. You don't degrade someone over sexual violence when a victim is trying to be brave in front of her abuser.
Sorry, I got really mad. I got real mad.
Part of the reason why this video has taken so long to come out is because every time I think I've said my piece, something else comes out online that means I start a whole new point or add on to a point I've already made. And for this section, while I was editing, it was the documentary on Lily Phillips, I Slept with 100 Men in a Day, and the internet's wider reaction to that, because some really right-wing people got really intense about it and were like, it's so inappropriate, like that's disgusting, she's a whore. And then a bunch of left-wing people were concerned for her safety, and I was incredibly concerned for her safety. It seemed like there was very little consideration done for STD checks and things like that. Like the assistant is on camera saying that they had previously organised with some people and then some of them had dropped out. And so they were just accepting people day of. And like you're not getting an STD test done day of. And that's extremely worrying, extremely concerning on a safety level. It's also extremely concerning the clear emotional reaction she had. She talks about dissociating. She talks about how she'll only remember like maybe 10 of the men all up, like repeatedly expressed that they'd pushed lunch, they'd pushed breaks because they were just not getting through the men fast enough, and so she wasn't eating enough.
When was the last time you ate?
I think I had a yam yam. Yam yam, is that what they're called? A little pastry. And I think I had a sandwich, and that was and then the rest come.
They showed the room at the end, and it's very heavily blurred on YouTube, but they're pretty descriptive when they talk about it, and like that's filthy. She talks about the toll it's taken on her, and in particular, like she mentions her eyes being sore and stinging because she asked them not to come in her eyes, and then they did anyway.
I think I repeatedly said, you can come on my face, but not in my eye.
And they just went right at the eyes.
Well, I think like it might have been an accident.
The repeated boundary crossing by the men, by her team, it's all extremely worrying, and it's even more worrying that a lot of the response from the internet was a bunch of men calling her a whore. Sure, that is her profession, but she makes those videos because they sell, and they're not selling to women. I'm sure there are some women that watch it, but she's making videos like that because they sell to men, and the people that participated were all men. It was 100 men who stepped up to sleep with her. The same level of scrutiny is in nowhere near reflected back on those men at the same capacity as it is on her. And all those men knew what they were going in for. They knew they were sleeping with her on the same day as she was sleeping with 99 other men. That was the deal. They went in there with eyes wide open. She was very upfront about things. And yet, so many men online are talking about her like she's disgusting and not mentioning these 100 men at all. It just makes me cross, because there are conversations to be had as a result of that documentary. There are conversations about safety in sex work. There are conversations about regulations in sex work. There are conversations about having the kind of management team that knows how to organize. Like, her management team were so clearly unorganized, didn't know what was going on, even though there are 9 of them. Seemingly no one had an actual plan or a schedule for the day. At first, they weren't even going to hire security. They made that decision last minute. That's all incredibly unsafe. And part of the reason why it's so unsafe is because sex work is not a regulated industry, because it is so stigmatized and in a lot of places very illegal. There is so much less oversight, workplace health and safety implemented in order to keep sex workers safe. I don't know, man. It's infuriating.
I'm going to talk more about the specific dangers that women face at the hands of men and the way the system favors that particular thing a lot later. I just wanted to cover it a little bit now to show you the double standards of how a man will murder a woman and the defense will be, but she wanted it. Hey girl, that's not how that works. I could go on, but researching this section has taken years off my life in a way that judges seem determined not to do to guilty men. To be clear, I'm an advocate for prison reform, and I don't think that our current prison system works at all. But come on, the lack of consequences is infuriating. Male comedians and artists who talk about cancel culture on stage at their sold-out Netflix tapings, on their podcasts, to their audience of millions. Woody Allen has been accused of abusing his children and is currently married to his stepdaughter, who he met between the ages of 7 and 9 years old. And somehow people still rush to make movies with him. It hasn't seemed to affect his career at all. And every time people bring it up, there's an annoyance associated with it. Like, we know, but he's a genius, so stop reminding us. There's an uncomfortability with being reminded of their actions. Michael Jackson, nuff said. OJ released a book called If I Did It. Roman Polanski alone should be a case study on how cancel culture is a crock of shit as long as you're a powerful enough man. He was convicted of the rape of a 13-year-old, and even after he fled the country, people will still not only work with him, but praise his art. Men can be literally evil, and people will still let them have a thriving career. Competent female directors with glowing reviews will make one box office flop and never work in the industry again. As Tara Isabella Burton stated in her Vox article on the dark history behind letting male geniuses get away with bad behavior, artists are tormented geniuses. Women, especially when they're muses, give them what little release they can find in this cold, cruel world. Because he is so misunderstood by the world, because his feelings are so much stronger and more important than anybody else's. The male artist simply must be gratified. He is not a harasser. In other words, he's just overcome by the pure intensity of his artistic feeling. The most recent example of this phenomenon, and the parallel phenomenon of the tragic artist, was the media fervor around Liam Payne. Liam Payne, regardless of how tragic and genuinely heartbreaking his death was, abused his girlfriend. And now, she's the one copping comments from people blaming her for his death simply for coming forward with her experiences. That is disgusting. And anybody doing that should be absolutely ashamed of themselves. But it's also not an isolated incident. Victims are constantly threatened with the consequences of leaving their abuser, being suicide or self-harm. And it's incredibly brave to leave or come forward with that hanging over your head. And if they do that and the person follows through on those threats, this is incredibly re-traumatizing for those victims. But who cares about her? Here's a petition to raise awareness for mental health created entirely because of Liam's death. I'm not saying that raising awareness isn't a good thing or that it doesn't come from a good place. All I'm saying is that once you notice the disparity in how the genders are treated with regards to mental health, it is impossible to unsee. The kinds of men who are looking down on male mental health awareness are the exact kinds of men who could benefit the most from it. You're gatekeeping yourself from your own happiness, and you're trying to drag everybody else down with you. Male mental health has been deprioritized by men, not you personally, but by the men who raised you. The generations of boys don't cry fathers and teachers and bosses who created a world where a man can be absolved of any crime except for emotional intimacy with somebody he's not sexually attracted to. Young girls are socialized to be more polite, to swallow their feelings and learn to process them from a young age, while boys aren't, and tend to learn to release their feelings in bursts of anger and frustration, which then leads them to an unhealthy relationship with themselves and their emotions later in life. And I'm sure I don't have to tell you that it was not women who created this system. Men are expected to be breadwinners, to lead the household, whatever that means, but they're not taught how to nurture or how to actually raise children or communicate effectively with their peers. They have to suppress their feelings for fear of being labeled as gay or girly, because apparently there's nothing worse, which is a lot of work. It's almost like, in some ways, they're performing a kind of invisible labor.
The capillaries in my eyes are bursting. If our love died, would that be the worst thing? Somebody I thought was my savior, you sure make me do a whole lot of labor. The callous skin on my hands is cracking. If our love ends, would that be a bad thing? And the silence haunts our bed chamber. You make me do too much labor.
You've probably heard the term invisible labor by now, but to make sure we're all on the same page, it refers to the often unnoticed labor performed by women in relationships, families, and workplaces. The kind of thing that you don't notice is being done if you're not ever required to do it. The cleaning, organizing, and managing that men simply think happens by magic. This TikTok shows the physical aspect pretty clearly.
My husband told me that I don't clean up after him. He doesn't make any messes. Mind you, I'm sick. It's 7:16 a.m. Just gonna show you the first mess. That would be his wet towel in the bed that I'm in sleeping from him just showering before work. Job number 2, 7:44 a.m. Clothes on the side of the bed because we don't have baskets. We don't have laundry baskets here in this house. Job number 3, 7:46 a.m. I've only been out of bed for like, I don't know, 15 minutes. Asked him to change the baby before he left this morning. We wrapped the baby in a Snuggie. I usually fold it and put it back in his changing table drawer. Apparently it just goes here in a pile. I'm even gonna give some credit here where credit's due. He put the baby bottles in the right spot, but like putting them in there to soak like this it's really not going to benefit me at all. So you can see like these ones I put in. We're getting ready to leave. I can't stand it. This one like really gets me. There is a shoe rack. I'm also going to mind you that all of these are his. When I come home, I take my shoes off and I bring them to my closet, which mind you, he has one too. One last thing, 7:59, so many minutes later. He wears a hat every day of his life. He will stack hats as tall as fucking me in a basket in the bathroom. We're only at 3, but if I let it go, tall as me.
Specifically, these are examples of both invisible labor and weaponized incompetence. I presume by this point that most people have at least heard of weaponized incompetence, but in case you haven't, this is where people, often but not exclusively men, feign an inability to complete or master a task, so that in the future they're not expected to attempt it again, and that drudgery is then taken over by someone else. This can be anything from oversalting dinner on their night to cook, breaking dishes while washing up, putting the colors in with the whites and ruining laundry, or being so bad at changing nappies that you become exempt from baby duty. It's also something that happens in the workplace. People, usually managers, push off their more tedious work on others because you're so much better at Excel than me, I'd only screw it up. Or even never being the one to make the office coffee because for some reason they're incapable of using a pod machine or boiling a kettle. It's not always just ruining a task to get out of it. Sometimes it's making the process of completing the task so labor intensive for the other person that they just give in. Because at that point, it feels easier to just do it themselves rather than walk you through it for the 15th time, or chase up every little part of the task, or field 100 questions about basic things. The best example of this is when women who usually get the groceries for the household ask their partners to do it. Even when given a list, there are so many stories of men getting the wrong brand, or the wrong flavor, or failing to pick up items entirely, or calling their wives from the grocery store to beg her to micromanage them as they don't understand what olives means and they need explicit instructions as to which jar it is, even though they've bought the same one for 5 years and they should know what it looks like by now. Tossing clothes on the floor or not putting them on the shoe rack right next to where you've taken your shoes off is weaponized incompetence. There is an argument to be made that it could be a neurodivergent blind spot. Like, I have ADHD and I often struggle to fold the laundry once I've taken it off the line, or put shoes back on my shoe rack every time I take them off. But the real tell in that video is that he's claiming he never makes messes. One of the worst parts of ADHD is the overwhelming shame associated with knowing I haven't finished a task and not being able to. Or even if I've forgotten it entirely, when it's pointed out, feeling like a complete pillock for failing to notice something that would be so obvious for someone else. Claiming you don't make messes isn't an ADHD thing. It's an incompetence thing. He doesn't see any of those things as messes because they're always fixed for him. He never had to do any of the labor associated with tidying up after himself, so he walks through life thinking he doesn't make messes. It's also the emotional labor. Nurturing, managing other people's emotions, and all the expectations that comes with.
Perfect example of this is I re-downloaded my dating apps towards the beginning of this year, and I decided to try and take it seriously this time around and really assess what I was looking for. In my whole life, I've been very independent, we split the bill on the first date, and I realized maybe I'm going about this wrong. Men are saying they want little dainty princesses, and you know what? Being taken care of to a lot of us sounds kind of nice right about now. So I decided that the barrier to entry to getting a date with me would be that you have to ask me on a date, obviously, and you have to plan the date, and I will show up for the date. Since I've downloaded these dating apps, I've talked to a number of men, gone on only 3 or 4 real dates. Because that's how many men literally can't even plan a first date. That's how quickly they expect you to start pulling all of the weight in a relationship that hasn't even started yet. For example, about 2 weeks ago or so, I start talking to this boy on the apps. Great conversation, right? All green flags. And then he hits me with like, can I get your number? Let's get off the apps and let's get a date planned. And I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, green flag, green flag. No date has been planned at this point, and yet I've agreed twice that we should be going on a date. About a day or so later, as we're talking, once again, he asked me, like, would you be interested on going on a date with me? And at this point, like, red flag number one. Sir, how many times do I have to tell you and reassure you, like, yes, you haven't even asked me out on the date yet, but you've asked me a number of times if I'd want to go on a date. That was the whole point of me giving you my number. So at this point I respond back, I'm really confused. We've had this conversation already. Like, I've already agreed to this. Why do you keep asking me this, but not asking me on a date? And he's like, right. Oh, okay, my bad, right? Red flag number two. So I stopped responding to him. About 24 or 48 hours later, he hits me up. He took the hint, obviously, and he says, Monday night, let's go get food. I'll text you closer to the date, a location. And I'm like, yes, 100%. Also noted, boys aren't stupid. He noticed that real quick. So Sunday rolls around and he's like, we could go get smoothies. And I'm like, that's a good idea because I like a coffee smoothie first date. But if it's after work, there aren't going to be any smoothie places open. So he and I are pitching ideas back and forth for what to do. And Monday morning rolls around. He texts me bright and early that he's super excited to go on the date tonight. We're talking throughout the day. An hour or two before the date, he texts me, oh, it's my uncle or grandpa or somebody's birthday this weekend. And I actually have to call my family tonight at 6:30, the time the date was planned, so that we can plan it this weekend. Can we push the date to like tomorrow or Wednesday? And I go, that's strike number three, red flag number three. Dude, no. I just respond back, I am unfortunately busy tomorrow, which I was. I had plans with my friends. And he responds back, I screwed up real bad here multiple times, huh? And I didn't respond back to any of this because you did, dude. Like, I had to back you into asking me on the real date, then I had to back you into planning the date. I'm not going to back you into showing up to the date too, dude. If these guys can't even plan a date, how are you going to build us a castle? My life is just easier not having to manage your daily schedule on top of mine. And don't even get me started on the concerns it would raise if we were to have children together. I don't want to feel like the only parent in a house in which I'm now raising my children and also my partner.
The invisible emotional labor also covers trans misogyny and misogynoir, which I am far less qualified to talk about than trans women or black people, and in particular black trans women, but which cannot go unspoken in a video about misogyny. Attempting to dress or do your hair and makeup a certain way so that you don't get attacked either for looking too much like a woman or not enough of one is labor. Deciding every day whether your gender presentation matching your internal experience is worth the intense amount of scrutiny you would receive is labor, because you're either conforming and doing the work of masking and hiding and biting back pain, or you're enduring the dangers associated with external perception from strangers. Being black in a world run by systemic racism is already labor, but adding in femininity or lack thereof only increases the toll it takes. Constantly monitoring your own behavior in public in order to avoid confrontation is labor. And most women have to do that in some way or another. It's just much, much, much worse for trans women and people of color. The goalpost is constantly being moved. And trying to catch up to it, say it with me kids, is labor. If you want more in-depth videos discussing trans misogyny and misogynoir, may I direct you to the channels of these amazing humans: Khadija Mbowe, Turb, Shanspear, Cat Black, Foreign Man in a Foreign Land, FG Signifier, Princess Weeks, CJDX, Little Shop of Ali, Yara Zai, T-Noir, Aranok, Jessie Gender, The Leftist Cooks, ContraPoints, Kaylin Conrad, Alexandra Avila, Philosophy Tube, Dead Domain, Thought Slime, Evasive, Ro Ramden, and Mia Mulder. There are tons of others. Those are just the ones I came up with off the top of my head, and the ones that I personally think are amazing and incredible and would like to be friends with. You'll have to promise to go and watch all of their videos right after this one. Deal? I'm so serious. Deal? In fact, I'm so serious that I've made a YouTube playlist with a bunch of their most relevant videos on this topic, and I've linked it below. So there's really no excuse not to at least check out one or two of them after this. I've made it so easy. Barely any labor at all. Invisible emotional labor is obviously most present within relationships, and it's even harder to quantify than the physical stuff because it's legitimately invisible. Taking care of children, remembering birthdays, knowing allergies off by heart, listening to others' woes and providing a comforting presence, managing the emotions of the household. If you've never had to do any of these things yourself because your wife or mother has always done them for you, how do you even know what you're looking for? It wouldn't even occur to you to think about it. And thus, when the woman finally gets sick of all of that work, and draw a line in the sand. The men are often completely blindsided. An article written by Matthew Frey in 2020 has recently had a resurgence online, and I highly recommend giving it a read, because when his wife first divorced him because of the labour inequity in their relationship, he thought she divorced him over the dishes, and he didn't understand why. As he states, I tried to help my wife around the house. I thought I'd wash a load of laundry, put it in the dryer, and maybe even fold the clothes too. Once I left an ink pen in the pocket of her jeans. She got really mad about that. Like, really mad. I thought she was being unfair again, as it was an honest mistake. If she had accidentally got ink stains on my clothes, I'd never have been this angry. I'd never be this mean to you over an accident, I thought. Secretly, I always believed I held the moral high ground in these conversations, because I was so nice. I believed, seriously, that I was a nicer person than my wife. I had a more cheerful disposition. I was more polite. My self-identity was one of being kind. So when she would angrily talk to me about something upsetting her, I was quick to defend myself against what I perceived to be unfair attacks. He lays out something which most women are aware of and most men aren't, which is that being the one doing all of the invisible labor also saddles you with negative labels around your attitude, too. Chasing up your partner all the time because they are not able or refuse to see all of the work they're not doing only worsens the relationship, because asking for help or becoming frustrated with inaction is seen as nagging. Because the expectations on women are so ingrained, men actually stepping up isn't seen as part of their actual duties, but as helping, which, as Matthew points out, implies that your partner is responsible for these things, and you're just lending a hand. Oh, so nice of you. I remember my wife often saying how exhausting it was for her to have to tell me what to do all the time. I always reasoned, if you just tell me what you want me to do, I'll gladly do it. But she didn't want to be my mother. She wanted to be my partner, and she wanted me to apply all of my intelligence and learning capabilities to the logistics of managing our lives and household, to doing the work of seeing and taking stock of all that must be done in order for our home life to function. When men actually do step up to help their partner, it's all too often accompanied by expectations of praise or gratitude, as if we went above and beyond because we folded a load of laundry or cleaned a bathroom on one occasion. Women run the household. They lead the household, and men take credit, like a figurehead or a false idol. Where have I heard something about those being bad? It'll come to me. To refer back to my dissertation, Sophia, who had married Leo Tolstoy at 18 despite him being 16 years her senior, extensively chronicled her life in diaries, which I have read numerous times. The night before their wedding, he gave her a journal of his sexual exploits, which is super weird and uncomfortable, considering she was inexperienced and again, 16 years his junior. She gave birth to 13 children and had 3 additional pregnancies that ended in miscarriage. Only 8 of her children survived childhood. She ran the family estate while her husband was writing. She edited all of her husband's novels and hand-copied them all numerous times, and she stayed devoted to him for her entire life. But 10 days before he died, he abandoned the house and refused to let her in to see him before he died, which devastated her. After his death, his friends continued to shut her out. She did 4 times the work of her husband and was never once appreciated for it. Women are constantly expected to match the effort of their male counterparts with very little fanfare, but are punished for asking for credit, while men will occasionally dip their toes into the domestic chores and be praised for the bare minimum. Once again, not all men. There are so many unsung heroes who are raising kids on their own, stay-at-home dads, trans parents, or even men who are trying their best to buck the nuclear family blueprint in order to ensure their wives aren't being subjugated. And those men should all be praised. But mums are simply expected to take care of the kids. Yet when dads do it, it's babysitting, or they're praised for the bare minimum. Oh, he braided his daughter's hair? Oh, cute. I know 100 mothers who could do that between making breakfast and packing school lunches. And most of those women know at least 2 different styles of braid. But go off, King. I'm not saying I'm not glad he learned. I'm just saying, unless we're throwing a fanfare every time a woman learns, what are we doing? This leads to a culture where they're praised for the bare minimum and not appreciated for the actual work they do outside of the household. But you'll note that it's not us who are mocking those men for their efforts. It's the goddamn manosphere twats. And I do not want to discourage men from learning these things. I'm not saying they don't deserve praise for involved parenting, but why is that kind of effort only the standard for women and not men? And all the invisible labor being on women isn't good for y'all either, because you'll hear men constantly complaining about how much work they're doing, and yet when they get home, their wife wants help with cooking or tidying or playing with the kids, when all they want is some time to decompress. Your wife wants that too, and she's also been working all day, but you don't see most of it as work, which leaves you feeling like you're hard done by, because you're the only one doing real work. It'll make you resent your wife, while she resents you right back for not seeing how much she's drowning in labor. And then something divorce statistics. And look at it like this. If it wasn't real work, why is it so hard for you to pick up that work once you get home? When women express a desire not to have kids, it's frowned upon. But when men do it, it's only natural. Men are allowed to be absentee fathers, but absentee mothers are the devil incarnate. I read a Reddit story the other day about a mother who was asking if she was the asshole for not taking in her cheating ex-husband's affair children after he died, because his parents and even her own mother were making her feel guilty about it. And her reasoning was sound. She found out he cheated through the birth of the children. And their divorce was messy for her and her kids, and she's still processing it. Her teenage children don't want to live with the affair children, and she doesn't ever want to take in kids that she doesn't love, because she knows they'll notice, and that's not fair on them. But her in-laws pressured her to the point where they told her teenage children she'd already said yes, and put her name down for fostering and adopting the babies without her knowledge. Because it's selfish of her not to take on 2 new children that only exist because her ex-husband cheated on her. Would you be able to treat those kids fairly? I don't think I could. Because I've also read numerous Reddit stories about people who couldn't understand why their dad was so cruel to them all their life, only to find out in adulthood that they were an affair child. People aren't good at managing their feelings. And kids are way more intuitive than we give them credit for. This woman was doing the most rational thing she could by refusing to take in those kids. And she was shamed and berated for it. Because she's a mother. How dare she? This is also a big part of the reason the 4B movement has gained so much traction in Korea.
What really told me the extent of how severe Korean patriarchy used to be was Please Look After Mom by Shin Kyung-soo. The book describes the married life of the mother and the father, and it's set only, 2 generations away from my generation. And the patriarch in this portrayal doesn't work all that much, if at all. All he really is that he's the head of the family. She works, takes care of the kids, takes care of the home, while her husband does nothing and goes out to sleep with other women, drink with his friends, and do whatever he wants. At the end of the day, he can come back to the nest whenever he wants with no consequences of any kind. And that was apparently quite common in Korea before, where men don't do anything but just for existing, they were valued. The eldest male had power over everyone in the family and let nobody do anything without his consent. And to me, people saying how radical Korean feminism has become don't realize that this is a proportional response to how bad it was for women, how they were just viewed as mere tools in Korean society before, how they were expendable outside of making babies, making sons more specifically.
This pressure comes from something that everybody has to deal with, but that a lot of people refuse to believe they do because they're trained to dislike the name, like communism or being cisgender. That thing is called compulsory heterosexuality. The idea that everybody should engage in this traditional idea of what a good life is, which involves dating and marrying someone of the opposite sex, and then settling down and having children and living a normal life. If you don't want kids, that undermines compulsory heterosexuality. If you're queer, that undermines compulsory heterosexuality. If you're trans or non-binary, it completely fucks with the binary that Compet is trying to enforce, which is part of why right-wing morons hate us so much. If you're ace, that's even worse, because at least allo-queer people can pretend to be somewhat normal. But asexuality exposes not just compet ideology, but also compulsory sexuality, period, as deeply flawed, which is why we're rarely acknowledged when the topic comes up. One of the biggest benchmarks of compulsory heterosexuality is the sexuality part. As Angela Chen states in her book Ace, What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society, and the Meaning of Sex, which is incidentally our book of the month in our book club, and I'm really enjoying discussing it with all of you guys, it's really great. It is a failure of society if anyone needs to say, I have a partner, to turn someone down. And it is a failure of society if anyone needs to invoke a sexual orientation to avoid unwanted sex, because saying no doesn't do the job. Compulsory sexuality is a set of assumptions and behaviors that support the idea that every normal person is sexual, and that not wanting socially approved sex is unnatural and wrong, and that people who don't care about sexuality are missing out on an utterly necessary experience. Within relationships, the desire to have sex and the desire not to have sex are so often treated unequally because of the common belief that entering a relationship requires giving up a measure of consent. As she said, compet ideals don't just hurt queers and spinsters, they hurt everybody. The expectation on men to be sex-obsessed, to be a stoic alpha who brings in the money because that's his designated role, is ruining so many lives. Not just for the women who feel forced to go along with it for fear of being labelled as frigid or even fear of retaliation if a man doesn't get his way. Not just for those men who can't fit into that role, gay, trans, ace, autistic, disabled, or otherwise unable to match the demographic, but also for you cishet boys. And if you're offended by me calling you cishet, consider not being a little snowflake and having the resilience to understand that A, it is not an insult, it is just a factual label, B, I am actively trying to help you, and C, I deal with rape threats and I still find it in my heart to listen to y'all when you talk about your struggles. So if you can't cope with the cishet allegation, kindly go back to 4chan and leave the rest of us out of it. As I was saying, cishet boys are screwed by this too. In the opening section, oh god, that feels like forever ago, doesn't it? I feel like I've been writing this for eons. I talked about how the pressure on young men is often so intense that when they inevitably don't match up to some part of it, it's crushing, and it can cause many men to spiral. There's a reason why incel forums exist, which were originally invented by a woman, by the way, but I don't have time to go into that. And while manosphere red pill ideology is so attractive to these men, it tells them that what they were trying to live up to is possible, and it's actually everybody else's fault that they can't reach it. Women are too shallow to go for you if you're not a millionaire. It's not that you've internalized misogyny so severely that women pick up on your attitude within minutes of meeting you. It's that they're bitches or sluts, and they're not good enough for you anyway. A compulsory heterosexual life will not automatically make you happy. But okay, just in case using those words makes things confusing or makes you less likely to want to agree with them because you've been trained to believe that those words mean something other than what they do, let me make it real simple. If you realize that you either do not like something or are unable to achieve it, making yourself miserable about it is not the answer. The answer is finding out what you do like and what you can achieve and creating your own happiness. For Troy Bolton, that meant both sport and music. For some of you, it means just sport or just music. If you're hungry but allergic to peanuts and somebody tells you that in order to stop being hungry you should just eat a Snickers, that person is not trying to help you. Hell, even if you're hungry and you have no allergies and you actually like pretty much every vegetable on earth, but you absolutely hate broccoli, like almost gag if it touches your mouth, and your dad tells you to eat it anyway, refuses to offer you alternative vegetables at the dinner table, and sometimes gives you more broccoli than other people, like it's some kind of innate trial that you should go through every week, like somehow, if you just do it enough, you'll learn to love broccoli, despite that never being how literally anything works, then you have a shit dad. That example may have become more personal than I intended it to. When I say compulsory heterosexuality is bad, I think a lot of people hear, she hates straight people, the gay agenda is real, kill her with fire, get the pitchforks. When what I actually mean is being forced into a rigid box isn't good for you psychologically, socially, or societally. That's it. Heterosexuality is not the problem here. The idea that it's the only way to exist is. And that includes existing in a heterosexual lifestyle that doesn't match compet ideas. If you want an interesting example of this, watch the video of Ben Shapiro talking about Wicked. It's fascinating to see. I disagree with Ben on pretty much every political issue, and I mostly think he's a huge pompous dick nozzle. But if you watch him analyze media without trying to artificially complain about the woke mob, you can actually see how much he's enjoying himself.
And Cynthia Erivo has pipes on her. I mean, she can really, really belt. She can really sing. So she's terrific in it. Ariana Grande, by contrast, does not live up to the standard of Kristen Chenoweth.
He's happier when he's discussing musicals and performances than he has ever been doing his stupid climate change debates.
Also, she doesn't have the voice of Cynthia Erivo, so every time she goes up, it feels like she's going into head voice. She doesn't have the ability to belt Broadway style. She has a much smaller voice than Cynthia Erivo.
But because he needs to be seen upholding his compet right-wing ideology, he rarely makes videos just talking about his little passions. And I feel genuinely bad for him. It can't be comfortable, always living for other people's opinions. Take it from me, Ben. You should be yourself. I promise. You'll be less miserable all the time. You might start making other people more miserable, but fuck them, am I right? Conforming for the sake of conforming doesn't make anybody happy. Ever in the history of time. If you subscribe to the ideas laid out in compet ideology because that makes you normal, you will only be unhappy. There was a man who went semi-viral on Twitter while I was writing this for his Bumble profile. In it, he had a link where he essentially had written a manifesto of exactly what kind of woman you have to be if you ever hope to date him. He talks about traditionalism, submission, body count, male friends, loyalty, gender roles, and appearance. Apparently, if you have unclassy tattoos and piercings, you're not the girl for him. One sec, just booking another tattoo. And he talks about fitness being vital when what he actually means is thin and conventionally attractive. Guess I'm out then. Oh, I'm so sad about that. So sad about that. Now, everyone dunked on this man. Deservedly so, he seems like an absolute prat. But while reading it, all I could think about was how misguided he is and how miserable he's going to be as a result. He believes the lie that he's been sold that men have to lead and protect, while women should cook and clean and submit. Ugh. And he has this idea that if he ever meets a woman who ticks every single one of his little control fantasy boxes, he'll be happy. The sad truth is that even if he did meet that imaginary woman,
but she's real, but last week she died,
he would still be miserable because he's not looking for a connection. He's looking for someone who can meet his demands. Not even like a checklist of things he'd like but could negotiate. These are demands. And there's absolutely no space in his manifesto for her demands. This colour's backwards. Deal with it. He wants her to be fit, but he doesn't pledge that he will always remain so. He wants a mostly virginal woman, but he's also looking for friends with benefits. He's policing certain kinds of tattoos and piercings, while himself admittedly having tattoos and piercings. But hey, at least he acknowledges that one. What he doesn't acknowledge is any of his own willingness to meet a woman's expectations, other than like, I'll protect you.
Scram! Leave her alone.
Which, like, come on, man. If that's all you can offer, she's better off buying a can of mace. Not to quote Daniel Sloss for the millionth time, but you're thinking of yourself as a whole jigsaw, and you're thinking of any woman you date as one perfect piece that will finally fill that last hole in the middle, while failing to realize that women are not just puzzle pieces. She is also a whole puzzle. Every single one of us is a whole puzzle. He's not thinking about a relationship like the meeting of two people, and thus he will die miserable, even if he's been married 4 years. He can't admit that he's confused and unhappy and doesn't know how relationships work, outside of what the manosphere tells him it should look like. So he decides that actually, he just has really high standards, and if you don't meet them, he simply can't take you seriously. That's a phrase that came up a lot, by the way. All that tells me is that he doesn't respect women. He's doing so much work, one might even say labor, before he's even actually been on a date in order to justify his feelings of inadequacy to himself and the world. And when men talk about this, it's always framed like it's an issue that only men face. But women face this as well, as do non-binary people. This is something I think a lot of people overlook when it comes to this manosphere bullshit. Men subscribe to these ideals because they're told that this is innate, that society should work this way. And it's only down to other people's sins that it doesn't. But even once they're completely down the rabbit hole and through the looking glass with this ideology, they're still not happy. Because compulsory heterosexuality does not make you happy. In fact, statistically, it makes you miserable. People involved in manosphere content aren't married, they're not in long-term relationships, and the people subscribing to it tend to be subscribing to it because they aren't either. If you don't understand what invisible labor is, try to quantify how much time you spend policing the actions of other people, whether it's writing dating manifestos or paying for Andrew Tate courses or constantly coming up against friction when you express those traditional values to other people. That's invisible labor. It's shitty, pointless, irritating labor, but it is labor. All it is doing is draining you, and it makes you a drain to be around. But if that level of invisible labor, which is entirely self-inflicted, might I add, is exhausting, imagine what the women in your life go through. Constantly doing twice, thrice, 4 times the work for half the credit. And hey, sometimes no credit. Let's talk about the complete betrayal of women that comes with the Matilda Effect. The Matilda Effect is a phenomenon where the work of women scientists is downplayed, ignored, overlooked, or attributed to men. Women are held to such a high standard, and their efforts are so overlooked to the point where some of them did the things that men have taken credit for. Rosalind Franklin did a lot of the early work on DNA, and then Watson and Crick took all the credit. Now, While this is up for some debate as to exactly how involved she was, it is inarguable that her contributions were unsung for a long time, regardless of how much work she did and how much of that work they saw. Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin discovered the chemical makeup of the universe, positing that stars were made up of hydrogen and helium despite the prevailing wisdom of the time. She was ignored, and she was right. Vera C. Rubin was vital to the discovery of dark matter, but wasn't acknowledged despite her role in uncovering the building blocks of the universe. It's only recently that we've started crediting those women. And astronomy is still a boys' club. I asked my friend Bryony, who's an astronomer, she said so. F. Scott Fitzgerald famously stole his wife Zelda Fitzgerald's writing and passed it off as his own, including from her own diary. And when she sent a manuscript to his publisher, he even went as far as to make her cut out pieces he'd already plagiarized from the novel, halting its progress before it was even published. He then had the nerve to call her a plagiarist. Einstein's first wife, Mileva Maric, was a physicist and mathematician in her own right, who Einstein claimed he couldn't work without, and cited her as doing maths for and with him. In his letters, he refers to it as our work, which some historians say means nothing, but others maintain means she contributed far more than we know. Margaret Keene's husband, Walter, passed her now famous creations off as his own by intimidating and threatening her into silence, and continuing to profit off her work for years before the truth came out. His wife, Katherine Johnson, was vital to the calculations of NASA's space exploration missions, but it took many years before she was fully credited for them, with most of them being attributed to the men she worked under for a long time. This includes other women, and especially women of color, working in NASA at the time. Monopoly was originally called the landlord's game, and it was invented by a left-wing anti-capitalist called Elizabeth McGee, whose original creation had two sets of rules. An anti-monopolist set, in which all were rewarded when wealth was created, and a monopolist set, which more closely resembles the one we have today. They were designed to be played as a set in order to outline the inequity of capitalism. A woman after my own heart. It is a practical demonstration of the present systems of land grabbing with all its usual outcomes and consequences. It might as well have been called the game of life, as it contains all the elements of success and failure in the real world. And the object is the same as the human race in general seems to have, i.e. the accumulation of wealth. Let the children once see clearly the gross injustice of our present land system, and when they grow up, if they are allowed to develop naturally, the evil will soon be remedied. Ambitious and optimistic, but I like it. She had intended it as a tool to demonstrate wealth inequality, and to get people more invested in it, and had actually allowed it to fall into the public domain in order to spread the political message. But the Monopoly version was the one that caught on, and was spread across America from person to person and household to household, until Charles Darrow happened upon it, and decided to sell it to Parker Brothers as an original invention. The company paid Lizzie $500 for her original patent. When she realized afterwards that they'd bastardized her creation in order to promote the idea of monopolies, she was furious. But the company had more power than her. She died, having received no royalties, nor recognition, for what is now one of the most popular board games on Earth, the version of which that exists flies directly in the face of everything she stood for. Ada Lovelace basically invented the first computer code, and Hedy Lamarr teed up the invention of Wi-Fi. If you've benefited from coffee filters, medical syringes, photo enhancement, caller ID, foot pedal trash cans, tissue holders, windshield wipers, home security systems, word processors, central heating, signal flares, computerized airline booking, science fiction, ultrafast lasers, the circular saw, dishwashers, electric water heaters, electric fridges, feeding tubes, fire escapes, laser cataract surgery, chemotherapy, or life rafts, you've benefited from the inventions of women. And despite our historical contributions, the fact that we've never started wars, the statistical upswing when we're in power, and the invisible labor that holds together a great deal of the fabric of society, the most invisible labor that we as women have to do is for our own safety.